Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take complex information, boil it down, and give you that essential insight, that shortcut to really knowing what's going on. Today we're diving into education, specifically project-based learning, or PBL. Now PBL, this sounds great in theory, right? Student-led, engaging. But what really happens when students encounter it? How do they actually perceive it? We're looking at a specific research paper today. It's from the Journal of Educational Management and Strategy, published back in December 2023. The title is Students' Perceptions on Project-Based Learning Implementation at English Education Department. Quote, our mission, to pull out the key insights, what PDL is supposed to be, its benefits, but also, crucially, the real-world student view and the challenges they found. Okay, let's unpack this. So first off, what exactly is project-based learning? The paper defines it as student-centered, organized around projects.
Exactly. It's a teaching method where the project itself is the vehicle for learning, not just a final assignment tacked onto the end. And the theory behind it, as the study highlights, is really promising for, enhancing how students learn. It's meant to be quite different from traditional methods.
Different how, exactly? What are the key contrasts?
Well, think about a typical classroom. Often it's teacher-centered, right? The teacher delivers information. PBL flips that. It's student-centered. The teacher becomes more of a facilitator, a guide.
Okay.
And instead of just transmitting knowledge, the focus is on students actively constructing their own understanding. It's a deeper engagement.
So less memorization, more understanding.
Precisely. Deep learning over surface learning. And it aims for authentic learning, to tackling real-world type problems within a context, not just abstract stuff out of a textbook.
Right.
You also see a shift from purely individual work to more group collaboration. And assessment changes too, less reliance on traditional tests, more on evaluating the actual project, the performance.
So the goal is really fostering that active learning, the critical thinking, problem solving, moving away from passive listening. Sounds ideal.
It does sound ideal.
But here's where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
The researchers noticed some things before they even did their main study. Some initial hiccups.
That's right. Their preliminary observations threw up some, shall we say, practical challenges with the PBL implementation they were seeing.
Like what?
Well, first, they identified what they called deadliners.
Deadliners. I think I know a few of those.
Yeah. Students basically putting off the project work until the very last minute. Which, for PBL, that requires time, development, thinking. It just doesn't work well. It often led to rushed, pretty unsuccessful outcomes.
Undermines the whole point.
Completely. Then there was an issue they termed lack of independency.
Okay.
In group projects, sometimes one person ended up doing most of the work because others just delegated their part.
The classic group project problem.
Exactly. So you had passive participation, which again goes against the collaborative, active nature of PBL.
Right. What else?
They also saw procedural shortcuts. Students skipping vital steps like doing proper research, planning things out, really developing their ideas.
Just jumping to the end.
Pretty much. Jumping straight to conclusions, which meant, the learning goals weren't really met and the experience was shallower than it should have been.
Okay, that's not good.
And maybe the most concerning was evidence of plagiarism or copy pasting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A lack of initiative, just imitating what others had done. This kills creativity, self-sufficiency, and obviously leads to unacceptable work. It bypasses the deep learning altogether.
So these initial observations paint a more complicated picture. There's the shiny ideal of PBL, and then there's the messy reality of student habits and maybe how it's being implemented.
Yeah.
It highlights a real gap.
Definitely a gap.
So faced with these preliminary issues, how did the researchers decide to systematically investigate what students actually thought and felt?
They decided to run a quantitative study using a descriptive research method. Basically, they wanted to describe the situation, student perceptions, as it was.
Makes sense.
They focused on a specific group, 32 students. These were sixth semester students in an English education department at IAIN Bukinggi in Indonesia. They were all taking an English for Journalism course where PBL was being used, and they used purposive sampling.
Meaning they specifically chose these students?
Yes, because they fit the profile they were experiencing, the exact PBL implementation the researchers wanted to understand. It's a focused group, but their experiences can tell us a lot.
Got it. And how did they gather the data?
They used a questionnaire. It had 30 statements about PDL. Students responded using a Likert scale, strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. Standard stuff.
Right, gives you a range of feeling.
Exactly. And the questionnaire was divided into 3 sections, mapping onto different phases of the PBL process.
And that Likert scale lets you quantify it, right? Get percentages, categorize the overall feeling from very negative to very positive. A solid approach.
Yes, it allowed for a detailed picture.
Okay, let's get into it. What did these 32 students actually think? Let's break it down by those 3 phases they looked at. First phase, choosing the project topic.
Right. This initial stage is meant to be very student-driven, with the teacher more as a guide.
And the finding.
The overall perception for this phase came in at 54.46%.
Okay. And what category is that?
That falls into neutral.
Neutral. That's interesting for the very first step of a student-centered approach, isn't it? Choosing the topic.
It is interesting.
If students feel neutral about picking their own project, what does that suggest? Maybe hesitation, lack of confidence, or maybe they just want more direction at the start.
It could be a mix of things. The detailed data did show that around a third of students did have a positive view of this stage.
Okay, so not all negative or indifferent?
No, not at all. But the overall average landing on neutral is definitely something to note. It suggests maybe that initial autonomy is a bit challenging or just unfamiliar for a chunk of students.
Right. How can we get that first step feeling more positive, more empowering? That seems key.
It's a crucial question for implementing PBL effectively.
Okay, what about phase 2? The actual project focus and development. This is the real meat of it, right? Where the independent work happens.
Exactly. This is the core construction phase, demanding a lot of student independence.
And the perception here.
Also neutral, actually. It scored 59.87%.
Still neutral.
Yeah.
Even slightly higher, but still neutral. This is the part where things like procrastination and shortcuts, which they saw earlier, would really bite.
Precisely.
So does this neutral score maybe reflect that struggle?
Yeah.
Students know they need to be independent, but actually doing it consistently is hard.
I think that's a very plausible interpretation. Again, there was a positive segment. About 31% expressed positive views here.
Still significant.
Yes, but the overall neutral score in this critical phase where the deep learning and self-direction are supposed to happen, it's striking. It suggests that maybe the support structures aren't quite right, or students need more scaffolding to really succeed with that level of autonomy. It's a challenge.
Yeah, it really highlights that gap between the ideal and the practice. Okay, so 2 neutral phases. What about the final one? Phase 3, project documentation and evaluation.
Okay, so this final stage involves student reflection, yes, but also brings the teacher back in more strongly for the evaluation part.
And the score here.
This one was different. It scored 61.87%, which put it into the positive category.
Positive, finally. So the highest score comes at the end when they're wrapping up, presenting, getting feedback.
That's right. And nearly 33% of students explicitly agreed with the positive statements about this phase.
So what does that tell us? Maybe students feel better when things are more structured, when the teacher's role is clearer in assessment? Or maybe just relief, it's done.
Could be a bit of both. It suggests they value that process of showcasing their work, reflecting, and getting that formal evaluation. Perhaps the ambiguity of the middle phase is replaced by the clarity of the end phase, which feels better. Or maybe seeing the finished product is just inherently satisfying.
It suggests the teacher's role in structuring that final part is, well, perceived positively.
It seems so. It's an important part of the experience that seems to land well.
Okay, so putting it all together, neutral start, neutral middle, positive end.
Yeah.
What's the overall conclusion from the researchers?
Well, when they looked at all the data combined, the category with the single highest percentage of responses, 32.22%, was positive. So their main conclusion is that overall, students do generally have a positive perception of project-based learning.
Despite the neutral phase.
Despite the neutral phases, it suggests that, on balance, PBL is seen as having a positive impact on their learning experience. But, and this is a big but, you can't ignore those neutral findings in the crucial early and middle stages. It really underlines how important it is to tackle those practical issues they saw initially. The deadliners, the lack of independence, the shortcuts, the plagiarism.
Right, those need to be addressed for PBL to really work.
Exactly. Its success isn't automatic. It depends on good implementation by the teacher, yes, but also on factors influencing student attitudes, their readiness for autonomy, and their focus. It's a powerful tool, but it needs careful handling.
So the message for you, the listener, seems pretty clear. PBL has huge potential for deep, meaningful learning.
Definitely.
But making it work effectively means acknowledging and actively addressing the real challenges students face, especially with self-direction and managing their time and effort in those middle phases.
Absolutely. It's about bridging that gap between the ideal and the reality.
So here's something to think about, a final thought building on this research. What stands out to IU? If students generally feel positive overall, and particularly positive about the final evaluation stage, how can we leverage that? How might educators, and maybe even students themselves, use that positive feeling at the end while designing projects from the very beginning, right from topic selection, to specifically build that autonomy muscle and head off those problems like procrastination and taking shortcuts? How do we make the whole process feel as positive as the end result?